Hey guys, Pike here. This is the first of two videos for cardio part 2 covering the arteries and veins. I'm going to do one for arteries and one for veins, so it's not just a really long video to have to upload. But I'm going to do the introductory information in the artery video. So to get started, we're going to look at the structural and functional differences between arteries and veins, and we're really going to just label them. So we have three major types of blood vessels that all deal in transporting blood to our body tissues and then back to the heart. So the three types of blood vessels, first we have arteries. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, and then those arteries are going to branch into smaller vessels called arterioles, which are just kind of baby arteries. An artery would be like a major off-ramp off of the highway, and then it goes into smaller roads called arterioles, down to the tiniest road, the tiniest vessel, which is a capillary. Capillary would be like your driveway, okay, going right up to your house. This is the vessel leading right up to a body cell. And so those are capillary beds. Then we have the veins, which are carrying blood back to the heart. And then those veins are actually draining blood from smaller veins called venules. So we have arteries, veins, and capillaries, smaller arteries called arterioles, smaller veins called venules. Just a tiny bit into vessel structure. Blood vessel walls have three distinct layers called tunics. Each layer starts with the word tunic, and that surrounds a central blood-containing space called the lumen. So all blood vessels have tunics and a lumen. Tunic layers are going to be thicker in arteries because one of these layers has to do, the middle layer, the media, has to do with muscle. And then it's going to be thinner in our veins. Okay? And so let's just jump right in. So here's we're not going to get too much in detail about this, but I did want you to see that blood vessel walls have different layers. Okay, and the main layers are called the tunica intima, media, and externa. And I do want you to see that there is epithelial tissue called endothelium, which just means epithelial tissue inside something. And if you remember, I talked about that they were one cell thick, simple squamous epithelium. And so these capillaries are so tiny, their walls are just one cell thick. And then here is the difference in an artery, a thick wall, and the lumen is very open. A vein is more kind of floppy and not as thick in the tunic. All right, so now we're going to just look at our major arteries. The aorta is the largest artery in the body. The regions of it is what we're going to look at in the picture. You have an ascending aorta going up, an aortic arch branching over, and then it's called the descending aorta or the thoracic aorta, depending on if you're talking about the section going down or the section in the chest, same thing. And then as it enters the abdomen, as it penetrates through the diaphragm, it changes name. Just like streets, like it's Stage Road in Bartlett, but Highway 64 out where I live. Same road, different name because there's a different location. This right here I know it looks totally crazy, but this is a kind of a concept map of your vessels, and we're going to draw something very similar to this. Okay? So, but first we're going to label our diagram. So just go with me, fill in the words, and then we're going to do a concept map where you can understand it just a little bit better. This first one is the internal carotid. Internal carotid, these are all arteries. Arteries are all always shown red. Then we have the external carotid. And then here we have a common carotid. Common means it's about to split into an internal and external. Okay, it's kind of like a trunk. Then we have something called the vertebral artery, which does supply. It goes up and it goes through the foramen magnum and supplies the brain and the skull, but then it also has vertebral or spinal extensions that go to the cervical spine. So then next we have the subclavian. Subclavian just means under the clavicle. We have the brachiocephalic. So really 2 words in that name. We have arm and head, brachial and cephalic. Next is the aortic arch. So we're just really filling it in. You don't really understand where they are just yet until we do our concept map. Here is the ascending aorta, the section going up. Next is the coronary artery. Coronary is the artery supplying the heart itself. Then we have something called the celiac trunk. We're going to branch that off when we do our concept map. Then we have the abdominal aorta. A superior mesenteric artery. Mesentere means intestines, so this is supplying the upper half of our small and large intestine. Then it will branch further to go to all the different parts. Then we have the renal artery going to the kidneys, so this is the right renal artery. There's also a left renal artery going to your kidneys. Then gonadal, supplying whatever pair of gonads you own that you were born with. Then if there's a superior mesenteric, there's going to be an inferior mesenteric supplying the lower half of your intestines. Then here we have a common means a trunk, it's going to split. Here's the common iliac, because it's right at near the iliac crest of the coxal bone. Then we have the internal iliac, supplying the pubic region, and the externals on the other side. So coming over here, we have the subclavian again, because supplying both arms. The axillary means armpit, remember? And so that is the section of that artery in the armpit. It's the same tube as subclavian. It's a different name because there's a different location. Then in the arm, it changes names from axillary to brachial. And then it splits into a radial artery and an ulnar artery. Same name as those bones. So the radial artery runs down the radius side, which is on your thumb side. And then in the palm, we have we have 2. We have a deep and a superficial. We have a deep palmar arch. It makes just like an arch in your hand. And a superficial palmar arch. And then you have the digital arteries supplying each digit, each finger, with a nutrient supply, a blood supply. And now down here, the arteries that supply the lower limb. First, we have the external iliac, which is what enters the leg. We have the femoral artery. Remember, femoral means thigh. We have the popliteal artery behind the knee. So all of these, not all, but many of these words we've had before. That was a body region, means behind the knee. Then we have the anterior tibial and the posterior tibial, going in front of and behind your tibia bone. And then on this picture, we're not seeing a whole lot of these arteries in the foot, but this is the arcuate artery. And then we are going to have the digital arteries supplying your little piggies. Okay. And another one that we can see a little bit is the one that goes down underneath. That is what the anterior tibial goes behind or underneath the foot, and it's called dorsalis pedis. So it really means back of the foot. It goes down underneath. Okay, so that's labeling the picture. But we're going to come down here to where it says Arteries Concept Map. And I draw really big, so I'm going to come out over here into the margin and just do mine. You can do however you want, but I don't like to be confined to just that one page. So I'm just going to pull over here, and I'm going to actually write out these arteries in the location that they're in. So what I want to do is I want to start with the heart, okay, because we're going to branch out our vessels. We learned this when we did Unit 12, all the major vessels leading to and from the heart. And so we have the aorta, but actually it's called the ascending aorta. That's the ascending aorta. And then it comes up and it branches over, and this is the aortic arch. The aortic arch has 3 branches. Okay. The first branch over here on the right of the heart, but it's the left of our picture, is called the brachiocephalic. The brachiocephalic here is going to branch and go to the arm and to the head. That's the name of brachiocephalic, okay? And so that brachiocephalic then is going to branch up and branch over. And the one that branches up is called the right common carotid. Right common carotid, which will then branch into an external carotid and an internal carotid. Whenever you see a common vessel, it's then going to split to an internal and external. And this is what's going up the side of your neck to supply your head. Okay. And then, before we get to the next one, you do have a branch here called the vertebral, which is going to go up through your, ultimately it goes through your foramen magnum, supplying your brain. But it's called vertebral because it does split and supplies your cervical spine, cervical vertebrae. All right, so the next we have, that turns into the subclavian, going underneath your clavicle. Then it's in the armpit, so it's called the axillary artery. In the arm, it's called the brachial artery. And then at the elbow, there's a fork in the road. And we have the radial artery, because we're in the anatomical position, so our thumbs are out, or are more lateral. And the ulnar artery. And then those two combine together in the palmar arch. And there's actually a deep and a superficial palmar arch. I just kind of put them together. And then off of that palmar arch, we have 5 digital arteries supplying each of your fingers, each of your digits. And so that's going down, that's just taking one of the branches off the aortic arch. That is all the way, taking it all the way out. The second, or the middle branch of the aortic arch, is the left common carotid. Left common carotid. And since it's common, it's going to split into an external carotid, and an internal carotid. So I know picture's getting a little crazy. Try to stay with me. So that's going up either side of your neck. Okay, the right and left carotids. Now, the third branch of the aortic arch, all the way on the left side, is the left subclavian. The left subclavian, and then we can just go down the arm, just like we did over here. So then in the armpit, it's the axillary. I'm going to kind of bring it way out here so that I can do some more underneath. Then we have the brachial, which branches into a radial and ulnar. Again, radial is on the outside. We're going to come together for the palmar arch, both deep and superficial, and our 5 digital arteries. Okay, so that is all the 3 branches of the aortic arch. So they really supply your head and arms. And so now this aortic arch arches down, and in the chest, it is either called when it goes down, it's either called the descending aorta, or if you're talking about location, it is called the thoracic aorta. Okay? And so this whole area is the thoracic aorta. So we're going to branch off just some of the major branches, major off-ramps to going to some of the major viscera organs in that area. We have the esophageal, artery. We have the intercostal arteries supplying your ribs and the muscles in between your ribs called the intercostal muscles. We have the phrenic, which is dealing with your lungs. We have the bronchial, supplying your bronchial tubes, all coming off of the thoracic aorta. Okay, so now we've got your diaphragm. Okay, that really thin muscle that is the border between the thoracic and abdominopelvic cavity. So once that aorta pierces through that diaphragm, that's the only thing piercing through here, that and the major vein, the inferior vena cava. Once it penetrates through the diaphragm, it's like we're going across state lines. So now we've got a different name. Now it is called the abdominal aorta because we're no longer in the chest. Okay, and so bring that abdominal aorta. We have several branches here because you have a lot of people, a lot of organs that live in this cavity, remember? So first we have something called the celiac trunk. Celiac trunk, it's called a trunk, which means it's about to split even further. So it splits into the gastric artery, main artery supplying your stomach, the splenic artery supplying your spleen, and the hepatic artery supplying your liver. Another branch off of the abdominal aorta is the superior mesenteric. Superior mesenteric supplying the upper half of your intestines. Then we have the renal, and there's also one over here because you have 2 kidneys, right? So there's going to be a 90-degree angle on either side. Gonadal, that's going to be basically the same thing. Okay, you're going to have one over here, and you're going to have one over here. It's either going to be short, going to a pair of ovaries, or a longer artery going down to your testes. And then, let's bring this a little farther. Then we have the inferior mesenteric supplying the lower half of your intestines, small and large intestines. And then last is the lumbar, supplying the lower back. Here's where we're at the groin. So now we've got a fork in the road to go down either leg. So here is the right common iliac. Again, with the common, I'm about to split into an internal and external. And a left common iliac. So then that's going to split into an external iliac, which goes down the leg, and an internal, I'm just going to put it here for both of these. Internal iliac is going to stay right in the pubic area and supply some of the lower pelvic organs. And so here we have the external iliac. And if you need to write right and left again, just know that we're going down either leg now. Okay? And so then we're going to keep going down here in the leg. This is the femoral artery. In the knee, it's called the popliteal artery. And then we're going to branch into the anterior and posterior tibial. And so let's branch. Here we have the anterior tibial and the posterior tibial. And then this one is going to come around, and that is the dorsalis pedis. And it just combines right there, but it mainly is the branch from the anterior. And the dorsalis pedis came underneath the foot. And then you do have another, like a branch off of that called the arcuate. And then your digital, supplying your little toes. Okay, and so I'm going to actually do the same thing on the left legs, just because I have both arms up here. And so let me go up a little bit. Okay. So quickly, you've got in the thigh, you have femoral. In the knee, we have popliteal. Then we have a fork in the road. We have the posterior tibial going behind the tibia. And the anterior tibial. And that one kind of comes up behind the foot and the ankle, and that is the dorsalis pedis. We have a branch off of that called the arcuate and digital. So these are just the major ones. Okay, you do have a metatarsal area, but we're just branching down to the toes. So when you pull back, do you see the person? Isn't that so cool? That looks so cute, right? So that's a great way to concept map these vessels, starting with the heart and showing all of the major branches of the arteries. Okay, so I'm going to leave this right here in case you need to pause right there. That's all I'm going to do on this video. I'm going to do a separate one for veins, so pike out. Bye, guys.